assistant scientist in the Department of Population, Family, and Reproductive Health, and a technical advisor on PMA 2020. And with me is Sally Dunst, who is a PhD student in our department and also a PMA 2020 research assistant. Before we get started, I just want to give a little bit of a background and rationale on why we're having this webinar and who the target audience is, just so that all of you out there are sure that you're in the right place. PMA 2020, Performance Monitoring and Accountability, which I will give much more detail about in a few minutes, collects data on family planning and fertility on a 6-month or an annual basis in multiple countries, and we disseminate that information to stakeholders, and that's particularly ministries of health and other technical groups who generally have some expertise or training with standard fertility and family planning indicators. But the data is not disseminated as routinely to less technical audiences, and by that we mean maybe youth or advocates who have experience with family planning but who maybe didn't have much of background or training in the statistics behind it. And so this is our first attempt to bridge that gap and introduce some of the standard indicators that we collect, how we calculate them, how we measure them, and what they mean. This is by no means an extremely technical introduction. It's very basic, but we just wanted to give people a little more introduction to how we calculate what we collect and disseminate. So with that in mind, after this webinar, you will be able to understand what information is needed to calculate common fertility and family planning indicators, explain common fertility and family planning indicators to non-scientists, and tell a story with PMA 2020 data using examples from Ethiopia. And what do we mean by tell a story? I think about it as each indicator we collect kind of being a piece of a puzzle, and that puzzle is the reproductive health needs of women in the countries in which we work. And so we want to discuss how you can put different indicators together, different pieces of the puzzle, to better understand what the needs are of women in certain countries and advocate more effectively. So this is also not an advocacy webinar, although we might have one in the future, but this just gives a background on what indicators you might want to include if you are developing an advocacy piece or if you want to improve your programs. So we'll start with just a brief overview of PMA 2020, and then I will pass the discussion over to Sally, who will lead us through the majority of the webinar, and she'll lead the discussion of common fertility and family planning indicators, including age-specific fertility rates, with a special emphasis on the adolescent birth rate, the total fertility rate, the modern contraceptive prevalence rate, unmet need for family planning, contraceptive method mix, and a few adolescent indicators. For each indicator, we'll go through the calculation, the interpretation, and then have a brief discussion and participation from the audience. For the first indicator, age-specific fertility rate, we won't have the discussion piece because Sally will lead the discussion herself so that people can have a sense of what we mean when we have this discussion. And then after that, we'll open it up to the audience. We will not be enabling microphones, though. The discussion will need to be typed in, and we will read the comments as they come in and then go from there. With that in mind, if you do have technical issues, please do work with the multimedia tech that is under the host on the right-hand side of the screen. And he can start a private message, and then our tech can help you with any technical issues you might be having. If you have questions, please ask, again, by typing into the chat window. We will address as many questions as we can during the webinar, either immediately if it's something that seems like it's of critical importance to the entire audience, or at the end of the discussion of either the indicator or the presentation. If we don't have time to address all of the questions, we will have a discussion forum open. The link to it is here. And we will post answers to all of the questions, but also any questions that we don't get to. And the forum will be open for additional questions, and we will be monitoring it until October 31st. And after that, we'll leave the forum up for anybody who will be listening to this at a later date, but we won't be monitoring it and interacting in person. So if you do have questions, you have to create a login. And then the webinar will be archived and it will be available on the pma2020.org website in just a few days. Okay, so we will begin now. So first, I'm just going to give a brief, very brief introduction to PMA 2020. Again, PMA stands for Performance Monitoring and Accountability. And PMA 2020 came out of the FP 2020 initiative. And the FP 2020 initiative grew out of the 2012 London Summit, where over $2 billion in funding was committed to improving the ability of women and girls worldwide to access contraception. And the goal coming out of this was to increase access to modern contraceptions to 120 million women and girls by the year 2020. But in order to monitor progress, we need frequent data collection. In the past, in order to monitor progress, the global community has tended to rely on the Demographic and Health Survey, or the DHS, or other nationally representative surveys, which collect a lot of information and great information, but they tend to be fielded only 5 to 10 years. And so to track the progress of these huge investments that are going into improving access, PMA 2020 was created. And so we collect data every 6 months to 1 year by training and employing local women in their community, who we refer to as resident enumerators, to conduct household and facility surveys using smartphones. We're really taking advantage of the proliferation of smartphone technology and the increasing reach of cellular network coverage. And also, we are hoping that we are empowering women to be able to be more active in their communities. So they will conduct 2 surveys, a household and a female survey, and that measures demand and use for contraception, and also a service delivery point survey, which measures supply and access on the health facility and health system side. Survey fieldwork is generally fielded again every 6 months to 1 year and takes about 4 to 6 weeks to complete. We generate nationally representative data on key health indicators in real time for 11 countries. In some of our countries, our estimates are both nationally representative and regionally representative. In some of our countries, particularly in Niger and DRC, our estimates at the moment are only for the capital cities, but we will expand in the future. We work through a network of partner universities and research institutions in country. So all of the surveys are actually fielded and managed by in-country partners. We compile data and generate indicators that we publish on the web. We have a standard 2-pager, which we will go through in much more detail in just a little while, and a detailed indicator report that provides most of our indicators broken down by background characteristics such as age and wealth. We check for consistency with the DHS because we do want to make sure that the estimates that we are getting seem like they are reliable and that they track with historical trends. We're currently active in 9 countries, and that includes Ghana, Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda, DRC, Nigeria, Burkina Faso, Niger, and Indonesia. And we plan to launch 2 more countries in the next year, and that's India and Pakistan. So this is a very simple infographic that belies the complexity of what we do, but you can see that we have our mobile data collection, and that this is our resident enumerator. She's a woman in her community equipped with a smartphone, and she will interview selected households and eligible females in that household, and we define eligible women as any woman between the ages of 15 to 49. She'll also interview any selected service delivery points in or around her enumeration area. And that information is sent via Wi-Fi or data connection to a cloud server, and then it's downloaded, checked, and cleaned daily by in-country data managers. Once the data collection is complete, analysis teams in country and in Baltimore will simultaneously conduct analysis, will create standard reports. We might have some special interest reports coming out, such as an adolescent brief, or perhaps something having to do with health facilities or SDPs. These are all reports that we have interest in developing. And then we disseminate this information to end users, and that now includes all of you. You're now one of those little people in the end users box. And then data collection occurs every 6 months, and so we share these results with stakeholders up to twice a year once our analysis and visualization is complete. So essentially what we are doing is really improving the ability of the global community to track progress towards reaching the FP 2020 goals. So with that in mind, I'm now going to pass everything over to Sally, who will take us through the rest of the discussion.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being with us today. We're really excited to do this presentation with you. As Linnea said, I am going to discuss a few indicators that we report on. And so what do we mean by an indicator? Just to make sure we're all on the same page, an indicator summarizes data to give us an indication or an idea of what's happening in a country. So PMA 2020 indicators relate to what's happening at the country level in terms of fertility and access to and use of family planning. This is our two-page brief. You can see that there is a lot going on here. But as Linnea mentioned, a big part of what PMA 2020 does is take the data that we collect and disseminate the data to stakeholders. One of the ways that we do this is with our two-page brief. And we actually do a two-page brief for every country and every round of our surveys. We also present indicators on our website and in a detailed indicator report, which is much longer. But today we're going to focus on this two-pager. Specifically, we're going to pull out some key indicators and talk about them in detail. We'll show you where to find the indicator, how to calculate it, and then discuss the indicator's interpretation and how we can use it. So just remember that there are a lot of indicators in the two-pager. At the end of the presentation, we'll give you some links so that you can be sure to find the two-pagers on our website. But today we're just going to focus on a few indicators. Before we dive into our fertility and family planning indicators, we are going to go through numerators and denominators, and it looks like we're having an issue with our slideshow. But basically what I want you to imagine is 10 women. And so we have some of these women who are wearing hats. And so if we have 10 women and 6 are wearing hats, we would know that 60% of women are wearing hats. But then let's say that 6 of these women are pink. And this is a silly example. I'm sorry we don't have our visualization here. But if we are just focusing on the pink women, we might see that only 4 of them are wearing hats. And so 4 out of 5 is 80%. So what we're doing here is we're changing our denominator. And so our indicator is really going to change from 60% to 80%. And so if everybody could just hang on one second, I'm going to try to get my slides back up. We'll be right back. So if everybody could just hang on one second, we're going to just take 1 minute to reload our slides. Sorry about that. All right, we're back. Very sorry about that, but I think that we're good to go for the rest of our presentation. So here again, we're talking about a kind of a silly indicator. It doesn't have anything to do with fertility and family planning, but now you can see much better the visualization of the example I was giving before. So here we have 10 women, and we can see that 6 are wearing hats. And so if I wanted the indicator of the percentage of women who are wearing hats, we know that it's 6 out of 10 women, or 60%. But if we move on to and look only at the pink women, we can see that of the 5 pink women here, 4 are wearing hats. And so that's 80%. So again, our indicator has changed a lot. And this is just something to keep in mind as we talk about fertility and family planning, because our indicators will change dramatically based on if we change our denominator. So let's get into some fertility and family planning indicators. The first one that we're going to talk about is age-specific fertility rates. Age-specific fertility rates, it's the number of births occurring during a given year per 1,000 women ages 15 to 49. So why are we focusing on women 15 to 49? Well, this is reproductive age. In other words, it's the age range when women biologically are able to have children and when nearly all women have births. Of course, there will be some outliers to this, but these numbers are very small. So we focus on 15 to 49 because we want the right denominator. We usually break down age-specific fertility rates into 5-year age groups. And one age group that we look at, 15 to 19-year-olds, is also referred to as the adolescent birth rate. You can see on our two-pager that we report the adolescent birth rate. We actually don't go through and report every single age-specific fertility rate for each 5-year age group. We just focus on the adolescent birth rate. So this is zoomed in on our Ethiopia Round 3 two-page brief, which is what we'll be focusing on today. And you can see that we report the adolescent birth rate across the 3 rounds of data collection that we've had in Ethiopia. So in round 1, the adolescent birth rate was 44, round 2 it was 71, and round 3 it was 75. So what do these numbers mean? So in the first round of data collection, it means that there were 44 births per year per 1,000 women aged 15 to 19. In the second round of data collection, there were 71 births per 1,000 women aged 15 to 19. So you might be thinking, wow, wait a minute, this is a really big increase from round 1 to round 2. What does this increase mean? Well, it could mean that we did see a real increase in the number of births to teenagers in Ethiopia. But another possibility, which we should keep in mind when we're talking about data that's generated from surveys, is that our denominator may have changed. What do we know about teenagers in Ethiopia? We know many of them are going to boarding school, and so that means that they're away from home. So it could be that when we conducted our data collection, some girls were away at school during the second round, and so they were not in our denominator. We know that if a girl is away at school, she probably has not begun to have children. And so this would take out a select group of girls from our indicator, girls who are not having births, and that would inflate our indicator. That might be a little bit confusing, but let's take a look at the math, and I think things will become more clear. So here's our math slide for age-specific fertility rates. We can see that the numerator for ASFR is the number of births in an age group, and the denominator is the number of women in that age group. We multiply by 1,000 because age-specific fertility rates are expressed per 1,000 women. So let's look specifically at 15 to 19-year-olds. We can see that in our Ethiopia Round 3 survey, we surveyed about 1,700 girls ages 15 to 19, and they had had 133 births. So if we divide the number of births by women, we get about 0.074. And then we need to multiply that by 1,000, and we get 74.9 as our age-specific fertility rate, or our adolescent birth rate. We could perform the same calculation for every age group, and that's how we would get our column of these age-specific fertility rates. Now let's talk about how we can interpret ASFRs. So what does it mean if the age-specific fertility rate for 15 to 19-year-olds is decreasing? So what does it mean if our adolescent birth rate is decreasing? Again, earlier we saw that there was an increase in ASFR in Ethiopia, but a decrease could mean that there is a reduction in the number of births to 15 to 19-year-olds. So that's sort of the straightforward, simple explanation. But what does a decrease in the number of births reflect? So let's think about some other things that might be happening in a country that's experiencing a decline in the adolescent birth rate. It could be that there is increasing education of girls. There could be a delayed age at marriage. There could be changing gender norms, or there could be an increase to family planning access. So again, it's important to keep in mind that influences on fertility are not singular. A drop in the adolescent birth rate can't necessarily be attributed to, let's say, the opening of one youth-friendly family planning clinic. We would want to look at other factors that are changing in a country to explore reasons behind fertility change. Another question we could consider is what about the age-specific fertility rate for 45 to 49-year-old women? What if that's decreasing? So again, remember that we can calculate age-specific fertility rates for different 5-year age ranges, and if we focus on 45 to 49-year-old women, we might see a decrease. And so one explanation for that would be that women are limiting their number of births or their number of children. And so they would be having fewer births. Again, it's important to look at other factors in the country, some of them that we've just discussed in our previous example, and think about why are fertility norms and patterns changing. Remember, if you have any questions, feel free to type them in. The next indicator that we're going to look at, which is actually very closely tied to age-specific fertility rates, is the total fertility rate. TFR is the number of children a woman would have if she were to pass through her reproductive years bearing children according to current age-specific fertility rates. This might be a little bit confusing, but in other words, we can think of TFR as what is the average number of children a 15-year-old woman would have by the time she's 50, by the time she's ended her reproductive years, according to today's age-specific fertility rates. Something to keep in mind with TFR that makes it a little bit tricky is that TFR is a synthetic measurement, meaning that no woman is actually going to experience the age-specific fertility rates as they are today as she passes through her reproductive years. Fertility patterns will change in a woman's lifetime. And so the TFR today does not necessarily mean that that's the number of children a 15-year-old girl today will have. But the TFR, it's a good way to measure what's happening right now with fertility in a country. We can find information about TFR on our Ethiopia Round 3 brief in a couple of different places. You can see the lower figure that we've pulled out is a table of the TFRs that we've calculated in Ethiopia across our 3 rounds. And above that, we have a graph showing how TFR has changed over the past 15 years. So we've pulled data from the Ethiopia Demographic and Health Survey, and earlier Linnea mentioned what the DHS is. So we've taken that survey and combined it with our data, and we can see that in the past 15 years in Ethiopia, fertility has declined from about 5.5 children per woman to 4.2 children per woman. Here's our math slide for TFR. We can see that TFR is the sum of all age-specific fertility rates times 5. So what we want to do, this is the exact same table that we saw a few slides ago with our ASFRs. So once we've calculated the age-specific fertility rates for each of our age groups, we're going to take an imaginary woman and imagine that she spends her reproductive life experiencing these age-specific fertility rates. So when she's 15, 16, 17, 18, and 19, she'll experience that adolescent birth rate of about 75 births per woman. And so that's the reason that we multiply by 5, because a woman will spend 5 years in each of these 5-year age groups. You'll remember that age-specific fertility rates are expressed per 1,000 women, but TFR is expressed per 1 woman. So we skip that step of multiplying by 1,000 when we do our summation, and we can see that we get 4.2 children per woman in Ethiopia. Again, I said that this is an imaginary woman, and that's because a 15-year-old in Ethiopia today is not going to experience these fertility rates. So this is more of a capture of what's happening right now. So now is when we would like to invite everyone to join in the discussion, and we'd really appreciate your ideas as we talk about these questions related to TFR. So our first question is that if TFR has decreased over the past several years, what does this suggest about contraceptive use? So again, this is what we've seen in Ethiopia. There's been a decline in TFR over the past 15 years. So what would you say is happening with contraceptive use? I see a few people are typing. That's great. And just throw out any ideas, and they can be pretty short. We'll just wait. Okay, great. So contraceptive use is increasing. There seems to be some agreement on that. Yeah, so that's a great idea. And in fact, what we do see at the country level is a very close relationship between increasing contraceptive use and decreasing TFR. Right, and so I'm also seeing some answers about more awareness of contraceptive use, more consistent use of contraceptives, more effective use. Right. So does anybody have other ideas of what other factors might be increasing TFR? And those could be related to contraceptive use? What do people think? What beyond contraceptive use could be going on? Think general, more what's going on in society. Right, education of women, community-based use, delayed marriage, great. Education of local doctors. Okay, excellent. You guys all have really good ideas. So here are some that I thought of. TFR could decrease if there's later, if women are starting to have sex later, if they're getting married later, or if they're older at their first birth. So this sort of delay in childbearing could drive a decrease in TFR. Women could also be increasing the amount of time in between births, which would drive a decline in TFR. And also just in general, women might desire to have fewer children. And so as women maybe are delaying births or increasing the number of years between births, they could also stop having births earlier than in previous generations. Right, so there are some other really good ideas. Abortion could definitely affect TFR in general, social norms about education. Right, so great ideas. Thanks for participating. These are all interrelated and all affect TFR. So now we're going to turn to talking about contraceptive use. We've been talking about fertility. Now we're going to look at the modern contraceptive prevalence rate. This is MCPR. And it's defined as the proportion of women ages 15 to 49 who are using or whose partners are using a modern method of contraception. And what do we mean by a modern method? We can break that down into short-acting, long-acting, and permanent methods. So some short-acting methods are the injectable, pills, condoms, emergency contraception, lactational amenorrhea method, and cycle beads. And so they're short-acting because you have to take a pill every day. You have to use a condom at every intercourse. And so in that way, they're short-acting. Long-acting modern methods include the IUD and the implant, and those generally are inserted into a woman and last 3 to 5 years, and she doesn't really have to think about it. Permanent method would be male or female sterilization, and those are permanent because once a person undergoes the procedure, they can no longer have children. Just to note that in addition to modern methods, we also have traditional methods of contraception, and those include withdrawal and the rhythm method. We can find information about MCPR again on the front page of our 2-page brief. And here you can see that we have reported the MCPR across the 3 rounds of data collection in Ethiopia. And we report the MCPR for both all women as well as married women. In order to calculate MCPR, we need a few different numbers. This calculation is pretty straightforward. Our numerator is the number of women using a modern method of contraception, and the denominator is number of women. So in Ethiopia round 3, we surveyed about 7,500 women ages 15 to 49, and about 1,900 of those women were using modern contraceptives. So we divide those numbers, multiply by 100 to get our percent, and we can see 26% of Ethiopian women are using modern contraceptives. If we focus only on married women, so we are going to change our denominator and change our numerator, we can see that about 36% of married women in Ethiopia are using modern contraception. All right, let's do some more discussion. Are we caught up with our questions from before?
I think maybe you can do your question, and while people are typing, I can answer the question about cycle beads.
Okay, great. All right, so our first question about MCPR is, what does it mean if the MCPR is high for married women but low for all women? So that's what we just saw in Ethiopia. There was about a 10% difference in the MCPR for all women, which was about 26% versus married women, which was about 35 or 36%. So why would that be?
So as you all are typing that, I can address sort of the question about cycle beads. So there is some debate in the family planning community about cycle beads, whether it is modern or traditional. It is right now classified as a modern method of contraception, and most of that is because when used correctly, it is highly effective. So we do classify it as a modern method of contraception. The DHS classifies it as a modern method of contraception. So many people think of modern as something that has to be injected or used every day, something synthetic, but cycle beads are one way to use the rhythm method, but they are classified currently as a modern method of contraception.
Great. Okay, so back to our question about this difference that we might see in MCPR for married women versus all women. So Joseph has said that the denominator is bigger than for married women. Right, so we are changing our denominator. So if we're changing our denominator, we need to think about then what's happening with our numerator. So it could be that when we look at all women, this will include unmarried women. And some of those unmarried women may be sexually active, but some may not be sexually active. And so it could be that unmarried women are not using contraception because they're not sexually active, but they're still going to be included in our indicator. But it could be that unmarried women are sexually active, but they're not using contraception. And this could be for a variety of reasons, including the existence of stigma against contraceptive use for non-married women, for example. So those are just a couple of reasons there. The next question that we can think about is, can we calculate the MCPR for adolescents only? This is a pretty straightforward yes or no question. What do you guys think? And if we could calculate it, what would the number mean?
So while you guys are thinking about that, I'll also answer the question about, is time a factor when calculating MCPR? I'm not entirely sure that I understand the question, so I'll try and answer it. And if I don't answer it correctly, then Habtamu, you can ask again. Um, we When we calculate MCPR, we use this based on a question, are you or your partner currently doing anything to delay or avoid getting pregnant? So it's not something that we ask about, is this within the past year? Is this within the past 6 months? It's, are you or your partner currently doing anything? And so that is based on whether or not she says yes at that moment.
Great. Okay, so I'm seeing some yes answers, and that's right, we can calculate MCPR for adolescents. We would just need the numbers stratified by age, as one participant said. And so the MCPR would be, if we were just looking at 15 to 19-year-olds, it would be the percent who are using modern contraceptives.
Are early adolescents less than 15 ever included? That they are not included currently in our surveys, but they are certainly can be included if a survey is designed to capture adolescents less than 15. In some countries where early marriage is very prevalent, they are included, but not currently in PMA 2020.
Great. All right, so let's move on to our next indicator, which is unmet need. And this is the percentage of women ages 15 to 49, again, our reproductive age group, who meet all of the following criteria. So it's women who can get pregnant, and what this means is that they are not menopausal or otherwise infertile, so they can get pregnant. They are sexually active, but they do not want to get pregnant soon, and they are also not using any form of contraception. We can break unmet need down into unmet need for limiting and unmet need for spacing. Unmet need for limiting refers to women who do not wish to have any more children. When we ask them about their fertility desires, they say they don't want to have any more. Unmet need for spacing refers to women who do not wish to become pregnant within the next 2 years. So this could mean that a woman is delaying her first birth or she's waiting in between births. Something to remember about unmet need is that we're not directly measuring the percent of women who express that they have an unmet need. This is a measurement of women who wish to avoid pregnancy but who are not using family planning. Here again is our Ethiopia Round 3 two-page brief, and we've zoomed in on our report of total unmet need. We report for all 3 rounds of data collection. And you can see that we break unmet need down into unmet need among all women and unmet need among married women. We show total unmet need as well as unmet need for limiting and spacing. And you'll note that unmet need for limiting plus unmet need for spacing equals the total unmet need. So now let's look at how we calculate unmet need. Again, this is a pretty simple numerator and denominator, and multiply by 100 to get our percent. So our numerator is the number of women who meet the criteria for unmet need. Again, this is women who can get pregnant, are having sex, do not want to become pregnant, and are not using contraception. We also have the number of women who we surveyed in Ethiopia Round 3. And so if we look at all women, we can see that there were about 7,500 surveyed, and about 1,200 had met the criteria for unmet need. So that means that about 17% of all women had an unmet need for family planning. When we look at married women only, our denominator changes as well as our numerator. And when we do the calculation, we can see that about 24% of married Ethiopian women have an unmet need for family planning. Something that's interesting to think about is if we see an increase in unmet need. So let's talk a little bit about what that might mean. Here's our current situation in Ethiopia according to our round 3 results. We can see that 24%, and this is for married women, we can see that 24% of married women have this unmet need for family planning. We saw earlier that the MCPR is 36%. So 36% of married women are using modern contraception. And then we have about 40% of women who do not need family planning. What does this mean? So this would be women, who do not have an unmet need and are not using contraception. So this is women who might be menopausal, so they don't need to be using contraception, or they could be trying to get pregnant or have a wanted pregnancy. When we talked about TFR, we know that fertility in Ethiopia, it's about 4.2 children per women. So there are going to be a lot of pregnant women who would be included in that 40% who don't have need for family planning. So what if this increases? One possibility is that there has been a decrease in use of contraception. So this is a hypothetical scenario where we see that unmet need in Ethiopia has increased from 24% to 34%. And that's been due entirely to a decline in use of contraception from 36% of women to 26% of women. This would probably indicate that there are increasing barriers to access. Something is going on with the supply of family planning, or women aren't able to access services. What we see is this percentage who do not need family planning has remained constant. Another scenario is, again, we see the same increase in unmet need, but now the percentage of women who are using contraception has remained constant. What has changed is the percentage of women who do not need family planning. And so this could mean that there is a change in the percentage of women who are sexually active and want to avoid a pregnancy. It means that nothing necessarily has happened with supply and provision. So it's not necessarily that a family planning program is serving fewer women. It's more that more women are in need of services. So what's happening instead of is that it's a change in demand rather than a change in supply. Here we have a couple of discussion questions. First, I'll ask what your ideas are on why married women might have a higher unmet need than all women. So what are some ideas? And again, this is what we see in Ethiopia round 3. About 17% of all women have an unmet need versus 24% of married women. Any ideas about why those numbers are different? Right, so some answers are that unmarried women aren't yet sexually active, so they wouldn't need contraception. And again, right, more married women might be sexually active compared to all women. We might have some women who are not yet sexually active. Okay. Our next question is, this is thinking more about advocacy as family planning program managers or people working in the family planning field. What message could you create for a policymaker, or what message would you want to convey to a policymaker if this is the case? So while we're thinking about that second question, I can see some responses to our first question are that it looks like family pressure to be having children might be happening among married women. Okay, so what do we think about what we would want to be telling policymakers if we see this higher unmet need among married women? Okay, I see somebody I think is not typing into the group chat. You're just typing a message directly to us. So if you want to just type directly into the group chat, that works. All right, so Right. So what Jill says is we need to conduct family planning outreach to married women, including raising awareness with husbands, increase contraceptive supply. Right. So if we see this difference in unmet need, I think that it could mean that we need to craft messages to policymakers to focus on women, couples, so an emphasis on husbands maybe with family planning, counseling, and services. But it's important not to forget about the needs of unmarried women, of course. All right, now let's turn to the modern method mix. Modern method mix is the percent distribution of current modern contraceptive users by type of method being used. We can find information about method mix in this pie chart on our Ethiopia round 3 brief. And so this is our method mix among married contraceptive users. So we can see that among married contraceptive users in Ethiopia, the vast majority, about 69%, are using injectables. Another 21% of married contraceptive users are using implants, and the rest are using other methods like pills, IUD, and sterilization. We also present the method mix among unmarried contraceptive users on our brief, and you can take a look at that on our website. Here is the calculation of method mix. Our numerator is the number of users of the specific method that we're looking at, and our denominator is the total number of users. We multiply by 100 to get our percent. So let's take injectables, for example. In Ethiopia, round 3, we had about 1,100 women who use injectables, and that's out of the total of about 1,600 women who are using contraception. So that totals to about 69%. And you'll see that when we perform that calculation for every method, our percentages will add up to 100% because we're talking about all contraceptive users, modern contraceptive users. All right, so let's discuss this question. What are some implications if the country's method mix is composed mainly of condom and pill use? So what would that mean? If we look at that pie chart and we see that the majority is taken up by users of pills and condoms, what do we know about pills and condoms? Right. So what I'm seeing is that these are not long-term methods, they're short-acting methods. And so, right, you have to take a pill every day, you use a condom in every sexual intercourse. And so that could mean that women and couples are relying on these short-acting methods. And that could reflect the availability of methods in a country. It could also reflect just norms and preferences. So we might want to look at some other family planning indicators. For example, we could look at unmet need. If there's high unmet need for limiting, so women want to be finished having children, we know that pills and condom use might not be the best match for those fertility preferences. So we could look and see if some longer acting methods are available in the country. Again, it doesn't necessarily mean that something is wrong or that we need change, because we need to take women's preferences into account. And if women prefer condoms and pills, that's fine. But we want to make sure that women and couples do have access to other methods if they want those methods. Again, we want to make sure that there's a match between women's fertility desires and their contraceptive preferences and what's available. So would you recommend a policy change if this is the case? Again, I think we need to look at the availability of and access to other methods. So not necessarily, maybe, but not necessarily. Let's think about a method mix that is composed mainly of sterilization. What does that mean? So what does it mean if most women in a country are using sterilization? What do people think? More effective? Okay, so sterilization, if we look at effectiveness rates, we know that sterilization is very effective at preventing pregnancy. And this is because sterilization is a permanent method. And so, right, so it might be that there are limited options offered to women. It could be that there are fewer methods available for spacing. Right, so again, it could be that women prefer sterilization. Women might be finished having children, and this is the method of contraception that they want to be using. But we would want to make sure, again, that women and couples have access to a variety of methods, and if they want other methods, that those are available to them. All right, let's turn now to our adolescent indicators. And there are a few of them. We can look at median age at first marriage, first sex, first contraceptive use, and first birth. We can also look at the mean number of living children at first contraceptive use and the percent of women ages 18 to 24 who have had their first baby by age 18. So again, these are primarily looking at young women, adolescents. We can find information about all of these indicators. This is actually, we're now on page 2 of our 2-page brief for Ethiopia. And all of these numbers are presented here in this table. And you can see that we present the total numbers for the whole country. And we also provide a rural-urban breakdown. And we'll talk a little bit more about what those numbers mean in a couple of minutes. So you'll see that some of these indicators relate to the median and some relate to the mean. And so pretty quickly, I just want to go over the difference between median and mean. Both of these numbers are trying to capture kind of the central number in a distribution. So this is a graph. Let's say that it's our distribution of age at first contraceptive use. So we have our women of reproductive age, and we can see that at 15 years old, not many women have started to use contraceptives, but that increases as women get a little bit older. So maybe there are a lot of 17 and 18-year-olds who have begun to use contraception. And then the number might peak around 20 or 21. So this is when it's common for women to begin contraceptive use. But we know that some women won't begin to use contraceptives until they're older, so in their 30s or 40s. And so our distribution is skewed or pulled toward the end of the reproductive years. So our median is going to be less sensitive to those extreme values. It's the middle number. And so it's going to be a little bit lower than our mean. And a mean will be pulled out by those outliers, so it will be a little bit higher. We can discuss some questions about adolescent indicators. So what would it mean if the median age at first contraceptive use is 5 years higher than the median age at first sex? When we think about Ethiopia, this is similar to what we see there, where the median age at first sex is about 16 or 17, and the median age at first contraceptive use is about 23. So what does that mean? Okay, so it could be a lack of sex education. Many more women initiate contraceptive use after their first child. Right, so basically what it means is that women are sexually active for several years without using contraception. And it's probably the case that many of those women are having children. So we would want to think about women's preferences. Do they want to have children during this time period? Or are they lacking access to contraception? So I'm seeing some responses that there could be a lack of education on contraceptive use and sexual health before it's needed. Right, so this could reflect a lack of access or education regarding family planning. Another question that we can think about is that in Ethiopia, we see that 14% of women in rural areas compared to 3% of women in urban areas have their first birth by age 18. Based on this information, would you make a policy recommendation? So what do we think? We see this pretty big difference between rural and urban areas in the percentage of women who have had their first birth by age 18. So one idea is that family planning services are needed in rural areas. It could be that more education is needed in rural areas or awareness campaigns. So those are good ideas. Again, we want to take these numbers into consideration in combination with information about women's preferences. So if women would like to begin their childbearing by age 18, we should take that into consideration. But as some people have said, we should also look at access to family planning services. Are there fewer health facilities in rural areas? Are women not able to access family planning services? Again, we need to look at women's needs. And I'm seeing a comment about awareness and resources. So there should be a combination of education as well as services, access to services, right? And it could relate to cultural factors. Again, I think that relates to preferences. All right, so we have discussed a lot of indicators. And we've kind of talked about them in small pieces, and now we want to try to tie things together. So what's the big picture here? Why are we collecting all of this data, and why do we care? I think that we should think about this question in terms of what are women and couples' needs, and are these needs being met? So that's the main idea of collecting all of these data. So we can break down our larger question into some smaller questions, including when are women starting to have sex and starting to have children? Are women using contraception, and what are they using? Are women able to delay births if they want to? And once women and couples have had as many children as they want, are they able to stop having children? So these questions, I think, are what we should keep in mind when we're trying to get a sense of what's happening in a country. Before, you saw that we presented some indicators by rural versus urban. And so what you see here is sort of a timeline of a woman's life in rural Ethiopia according to the data that we're collecting. So you can see that for an average rural Ethiopian woman, she'll start having sex at about 16. She'll get married a year and a half later at about 17, and she'll have her first birth just before 20. She'll begin using contraceptives at about 24, and we know from the method mix that this is likely to be injectables. And our TFR for rural Ethiopia is about 4.9, so we could make a guess that this woman will have about 5 children in her life. Now, if we take a look at an average urban Ethiopian woman, so this is women living in cities, in urban areas in Ethiopia, and we can see that on average, a woman will start having sex at about 18, get married a year later have her first birth. She'll start using contraceptives at about 22, and based on TFR rates for urban areas, she'll have about 2.5 children. And that's a little bit funny to think about, but it means either 2 or 3 children on average. So let's look at these average women side by side. And so what do we think about the needs and experiences of women in Ethiopia, and how are they different?
I'm sorry to interrupt, but can you confirm? Can someone confirm if they can see the figures? Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, great. So we can see that things are pretty different between rural and urban areas. There are some similarities, but also some pretty big differences. So in urban areas, women are starting to have sex and getting married a little bit later than in rural areas. But in both places, women are having their first birth around the same age, around 20. What we can see in in urban areas is that women begin to use contraceptives a little bit earlier than in rural areas. And so if we pull in some other indicators that we've been talking about, including the average number of children at first contraceptive use, we know that in rural areas, women, they tend to get married, have maybe 3 children, and then start using contraception, which again is probably the injectable, and then they may have about 2 more children. In urban areas, women will get married, have 1 or 2 children, start using the injectable, and then have another 1 or 2 children. Again, we can, so what are some ideas about what do we think about the needs and experiences of women? So it could be that in rural areas there is less access to family planning. It could be that rural women are having sex earlier but using contraceptives later, and I think that we can see that that's true. It could also reflect sort of what's going on culturally, that rural women might have less education, less access to education, and there could be earlier marriage. So those are some cultural norms that might be affecting these numbers. And there could also be differences, exactly, in the preferences between rural and urban communities. Right, so the idea of behind this is to think about how we can look at all of these indicators at once and try to get as comprehensive a picture as we can about things that are happening in different areas, and look at get a sense of how the pictures are different. And so I'm seeing some other ideas about right, cultural importance attached to early marriage and having more children, right, differences in preferences of number of children, right. So again, I think it's important to look at what's happening and then think about what are women and couples' access to services, and do they have access to the services that they want. And so in conclusion, that's about the end of our webinar. And so we welcome questions right now. We have some time to discuss. But we hope that overall this webinar has improved your understanding of our data and indicators and helped you to think through the reasons behind levels of and changes in these indicators. And we hope that you have learned how you can put these indicators together to tell a story about women and couples in a country that interests you. And we really hope that you will take our data to the next level and help improve family planning programs and to better meet the needs of women and couples. So please feel free to type in your questions. While people are doing that, I just want to show you a couple of resources. So we would really love your feedback about this webinar, how we can improve this webinar, and also we'd love your ideas for future webinars, so webinars about other topics. And so there is a survey that we'll type in for you to click in just a minute, but you can click on that. And as Linnea said before, if you have any questions or comments that we don't have time to get to today, or if you think about them afterward, you can go to the forum, and we've typed that in the chat box. So it's pma2020.org/forum/QA family planning measurement. So hopefully you can just copy paste that into your browser. And as Linnea said, we'll be monitoring that for about a week, but our answers to questions will stay there for you to look back on. But in general, if you ever have any questions or comments about PMA 2020, those can always be directed to info@pma2020.org. All right, and here is just a list of references and resources. We're going to post these slides on our website, so you'll have access to all of these links. But this is just directing you to our website, our Facebook and Twitter page, and then some specific links on our website to our 2-page briefs, the one that we have gone through today, as well as other publications and our definitions of indicators. And then we put in a couple of other resources, including measure evaluation, family planning and reproductive health indicators database, and the FP 2020 core indicators. So as we said, there's so much more that we could have talked about today. There are so many indicators out there, and we've just talked about a few. And so these resources will help you to learn more. So now we can take questions.
So there's one question about whether or not the slides will be posted, and I see Gates Institute has answered that, but yes, it will be posted just in a few days. Then there's another question about whether we have full reports for each round of data or only the two-pagers. At this time, we only have the two-pagers for each round. We are hoping that in the future, in the very near future, we will have an online visualization tool that will provide the breakdown of most of these indicators by background characteristics. And so we might not necessarily have a full report with text, but there will be the ability to do sort of your own calculations by background characteristics for each round of data.
Okay, and there was a question about job opportunities with PMA 2020. And I think we post job opportunities as they come up on our website, so you can look there. And we are always expanding, so opportunities come up pretty frequently.
Emmeline, your question about the unmet need indicator, is sterilization included in the do not need family planning category or in the using contraception category? Women who are currently using a method of contraception are classified as not needing or not having unmet need for family planning. They have their needs met by definition. So any woman who's using a modern method of contraception has their need met by definition and does not have unmet need.
One question is about the effect of socioeconomic status. I'm not sure if this is what you're referring to, but we do report some indicators based on wealth quintile. So we calculate 5 categories of SES, and we do report indicators similar to the way that we showed some indicators for urban versus rural areas. We report some based on wealth quintile.
Joseph, for revisiting the calculation of the TFR table, I think that might be something best left to the online forum where we can have a little more, we can write something out and show the calculation in a little more detail, but I think probably not something that's best described right now. So we'll have the answer for you on the online forum. I'm not sure exactly the question. Can we see some of the formulas in DHIS2? I'm not familiar with that acronym, so if you can explain what that is.
And someone asked if we ever use CYPs. That's a couple years of protection. And I don't think that we do report on that, but it's something that can be calculated with our data. We actually did a special analysis for a presentation last month, and we calculated CYPs using the formulas that you need for that, including the number of users and the conversion factors. So it's definitely something that you can do with our data, but generally that's not something that is included on our 2-page brief.
Do we consider the education status of women? So we don't provide any breakdowns on our 2-page brief by the education status of women, but our detailed indicator report does provide that breakdown. And if you go to our website, there is under our data and research tab, something called the snapshot of indicators. And we do have, for our first rounds of data collection in Uganda, Kenya, Ghana, and Ethiopia, these indicators broken down by education status, wealth, age, parity, and region and urban-rural status. So those are all sort of standard background characteristics that we do break things down by. And we'll have more of those snapshot indicator tables very soon.
Maria asked if we sometimes address small sample sizes for our estimates as we break down by age groups and regions. Right, and so this is an issue in some of our countries with the level that we can report indicators, because our numerators and denominators can get pretty small, or do you aggregate years as you get them to get more stable estimates?
So both. For some of our countries that have smaller sample sizes, we will only produce our detailed indicator reports or the snapshot of indicator tables by pooled rounds. So if we don't have, if it's a country with either very low use, and so our numerator is very small, or just if it's a smaller sample size, and so our numerator and denominator is small, then we might pool so that we can have larger sample sizes to break down. And there are some cases where we just won't present the results because the numbers are so small. And so that specifically is more for our health facility survey, particularly if we have, we try and break down our estimates by public versus private. And in some countries, there's a very small private health facility community. And so we don't break down those estimates any further.
Great. Okay. So I think that we're all caught up with the questions, and I don't see anybody else typing. Again, if you have any more questions, please feel free to post on our forum, and we'll address all of those questions there. And I'm going to, whoops, sorry, there we go. So I'm going to type in really quickly this address to our Survey Monkey, so that hopefully everybody could just, is really quick. If you could just fill it out, we'd really appreciate it. We'd just like to know who is listening and what you think for any future webinars. Okay, so feel free to contact us if you have any more questions, and I think we're going to sign off. Thanks so much, everybody, for attending.
Thank you so much.